Human reproduction is a miraculous journey from two haploid cells that fertilize an egg into a multicelled organism capable of independent life. So once fertilization occurs, we have a whole new process that is occurring within the female body. So the union of those two haploid cells, one sperm and one egg in the fallopian tube, now have the capability of producing a whole multicelled human capable of independent life. Only one spermatozoa will fertilize an egg, and there's a reaction when one sperm gets inside the egg, which prevents any other sperm from getting inside to fertilize it a second time. Now, if by absolute happenstance two sperm got in at exactly the same moment, there's no way that cell would develop normally, and it would just flow its way through the uterus, and the menstrual cycle would continue as normal. Now that the egg is fertilized by a sperm, it's now called a zygote, and it is a diploid or 2N cell. So roughly 12 hours after the zygote is, after 12 hours after fertilization, after ovulation, the zygote is formed, and it's now a fertilized egg, and it divides by cleavage or splitting into two. And this is the process of mitosis. So there's no increase in size, but just that one fertilized egg, now a zygote, turns into two cells. And this happens roughly 36 hours after ovulation. Then a little bit later, it will be divided again into 4 cells and then into 8 cells. And then by day 3, it's a morula, which is a solid ball the same size as the fertilized egg, consisting of roughly 32 cells. So 3 days after ovulation, you'll have a egg-sized zygote that contains about 32 cells, known as a morula. During days 4 and 5, a blastocyst is forming. So there'll be a hollow ball of about 64 cells filled with fluid. The outer layer is going to form the chorion, and the inner layer is going to form the embryo. So we're going to see an outer layer of cells and then an inner clump of cells. And then sometime between day 6 and 10, that blastocyst may implant into the uterine lining. So here we can see our first image of the zygote, the fertilized egg. We can see those 2 cell nucleuses in there. Then we have our 2 cells, 4, 8, 16, and then the roughly 64 celled blastocyst in the bottom right. We can see that outer ring of cells, a hollow fluid, and then a clump of cells that will eventually become the embryo. Around day 6 to 9 typically is when implantation can occur, and the embryo is going to embed itself into the endometrium. And to save itself from being shed during the menstrual cycle, the blastocyst produces human chorionic gonadotropin. And this is what we detect in a pregnancy test, either in blood or in urine. And the HCG produced by the embryo maintains the corpus luteum for about 2 to 3 months, so that it produces progesterone, so that the uterus does not contract and the lining is not shed. And this also will prevent any further ovulation. After the blastocyst is formed, a process called gastrulation takes place. And gastrula is where from our original 64-celled, I can become any cell in the body. Through gastrulation, we are going to develop 3 different layers of cells, which is going to start our differentiation to becoming a human. Well, they are always going to be human cells, but what part of the human are they going to become? So between days 7 and 12, so this is typically before people even know that they are pregnant, a gastrula forms. So the blastocyst is going to push in and form 3 primary germ layers. And then that hollow space inside is going to form the primitive gut, because our gut is a tube from our mouth to our anus. So those 3 germ layers are the ectoderm, and this forms the nervous system, as well as the epidermis of the skin and everything that comes from our skin. So our hair, our fingernails, our ears, our lining of our nose, our teeth. And this is the outside of our body, and the inside of our body, our nervous system, because of a process called when we form a neural tube. So we'll see an image on the next slide. And that neural tube forms in the 3rd to 4th week. So again, before people even know that they're pregnant. And this is very plastic. So plasticity means things in the cells can change. They can get rid of errors. So as the ectoderm folds in and of itself. It makes a tube that kind of breaks off from the outer layer and becomes the neural tube. So we can see here in blue, we have the ectoderm, in the red, the mesoderm, in the yellow, the endoderm, and we'll talk about those on further slides. But then at the very top on the right, we can see that neural tube. The bottom row, middle row of pictures, we can see how it's formed by a quick little fold and a pinch off. So we have our separate ectodermis as well as our neural tube. And this is going to be now autonomous from the epidermis layer of the ectoderm. So the mesoderm is the middle layer of gastrulation. We saw it as yellow in that last picture, and will typically form our skeleton, muscles, reproductive system, connective tissue, blood vessels, things like that. The endoderm, or the inner lining, the mesoderm on that image was red, so it's that middle layer. The yellow was the endoderm. So the endoderm is going to form the lining of the digestive and respiratory systems, as well as the endocrine system. So our trachea, our lungs, our stomach, our liver, our pancreas, things like that. So now at 4 weeks, roughly the earliest you can take a pregnancy test. This is the structures of the embryo. So we have a maternal blood pool and a chorion derived from the outer layer of that blastocyst, and those will together eventually form the placenta. We have a yolk sac that will become part of the primitive gut in the embryo. We have an amniotic cavity containing amniotic fluid. The amnion, which will become the amniotic sac, as well as the allantois, which becomes part of the gut, and the umbilical cord. So the chorion cells and the endometrial cells form together to fuse the placenta, and that's going to form kind of around the fetus. The placenta is the site of the exchange of gases, delivers nutrients and oxygen to the fetus, and removes wastes and carbon dioxide. And generally, there's no direct blood share between the mother and the fetus. However, chemicals and hormones are able to cross that placental blood barrier. The placenta will also produce progesterone and estrogen at 3 to 4 months. And this then takes over from the corpus luteum in preventing uterine contractions, preventing follicular development and ovulation, and maintaining the uterine lining. The amnion is the inner membrane filled with fluid to provide protection and maintain temperature. And this would be the amniotic sac filled with amniotic fluid. The chorion, which is the outer membrane, contributes to the placenta. This is also where HCG is secreted from. There is an extra amniotic coleum, which is a space between the amnion and the chorion. The allantois will collect nitrogenous wastes and forms the umbilical cord and the placental blood vessels. And the yolk sac surrounds the embryo, and it becomes part of the primitive gut. Here is what a placenta looks like after delivery. So one side that would be facing the inside of the amniotic sac, and the fetus has kind of a very tough, stretchy membrane over it. You can see where the umbilical cord is attached. And then the other side is incredibly vascularized, because all those blood vessels will be intertwined with the uterine blood vessels of the mother. So that is early embryonic development and the structures that support the embryo. Thanks for joining. Bye.